The most dangerous tax is rarely the one they announce with a press conference. It is the one they walk toward in stages while you are still using last decade's language to describe this decade's reality. People keep asking whether there is a new equity tax sitting in the mail with their property tax bill, whether some politician has already found a way to charge you every year for the wealth trapped inside your own house. They ask it the wrong way. They are looking for one dramatic switch, one headline, one obvious betrayal. That is not how government usually moves when money gets tight. It moves by precedent. It starts by proving it can take a larger slice of what you earn. Then it proves it can separate one class of earners from another and call the difference fairness. Then it proves it can tax appreciation at the moment of sale more aggressively. Then it proves it can raise assessed values more often, monitor ownership more precisely, and normalize the language of underused wealth. By the time people finally say, "This feels like a tax on what I own, not just what I earn," the machine has already been built. I have spent most of my life looking for incentives, not slogans, not campaign speeches, incentives. Once you understand incentives, politics becomes much less confusing. Governments with growing obligations do not hunt only for income. They hunt for visibility, for stability, for assets that cannot run away easily. And the average American family home has three qualities governments adore. It is visible, it is immobile. And in many cases, it contains the largest pool of untapped household wealth a family will ever accumulate. That does not mean your county is about to mail you a line item tomorrow called equity tax. It means the logic that would justify such a thing is already being rehearsed all around you. Look at the pattern carefully. Massachusetts voters approved an additional 4% surtax on taxable income above $1 million. Washington put a tax on certain high capital gains and wrapped it in language about fairness and modernization. California has entertained billionaire tax ideas serious enough to produce official ballot and fiscal documents. Even if those ideas are not law, New York, Hawaii, Rhode Island, and others continue to host versions of the same moral argument in different packaging. Wealth, we are told, is undertaxed if it sits in forms that are hard to reach through ordinary income tax rules. When a government learns that sentence, it does not forget it. And a homeowner needs to understand something even more important than ideology. The state does not need to invent a new way to find your equity. It already has most of the map. Your county assessor tracks value, your mortgage lender tracks debt, your deed records identify ownership, homestead filings, trust filings, transfer records, and increasingly sophisticated assessment tools make the physical asset more legible every year. The technology is getting better. The appetite is getting larger. The only missing piece is political permission. That is why I would not waste a minute arguing with someone about whether a pure annual equity tax on owner-occupied homes is already the law in America. In most places, it is not. That is not the useful question. The useful question is whether the system is moving toward more frequent, more granular, more creative ways to convert visible household wealth into recurring public revenue. The answer to that question is yes. Now, once you say that plainly, you can make better decisions. The first mistake people make is treating home equity as if it were automatically sacred. It is not sacred. It is merely familiar. Familiar assets lull people to sleep because they are wrapped in routines. You mow the lawn, pay the bill, and assume the structure around ownership is permanent. But a house is not just shelter. Financially, it is an asset on a ledger, one that local government already remeasures, one that lawmakers already discuss as part of housing equity, wealth inequality, undertaxed depreciation, and public investment capture. Once your home is discussed in that vocabulary, it stops being merely where you live. It becomes a tax base under observation. The second mistake people make is confusing legality with invulnerability. People say, "I paid for my house fairly, I paid property taxes every year, I followed the rules, they cannot keep reaching for more." That is a child's view of public finance. Governments reach wherever law and politics allow them to reach. If the fiscal pressure is large enough, yesterday's unacceptable idea becomes tomorrow's pilot program, and the day after that it becomes a fairness measure with a new name. I do not tell you this to make you fearful. Fear is not useful. Clarity is useful. Clarity begins with understanding concentration risk. If too much of your family balance sheet sits in a single house, in a single county, in a single high-tax or politically aggressive jurisdiction, you are not simply a homeowner. You are a concentrated investor in one immobile asset inside one legal regime. Most people understand concentration risk in stocks. They would never put 80% of their investable wealth into one small company and call that prudence. Yet millions of households do the real estate equivalent and then act shocked when politics starts to matter. Your home may still be a wonderful home. That is not the question. The question is whether it is also becoming too large a political target relative to the freedom it gives you. This is why I have always believed that asset protection begins long before a tax bill appears. If you really intend to move, then move early and move honestly. Do not play games with residency. The state is not interested in your self-image. It is interested in your actual pattern of life. If you leave a high-tax state, build the real facts of a new domicile where you sleep, where you vote, where your doctors are, where your mail goes, where your time is spent, where your professional and social life truly reside. Half moves create full-size headaches. A real move can be one of the most powerful financial decisions a family makes. A fake move can become one of the most expensive. If moving is not desirable or possible, the next step is not secrecy. It is structure. Structure matters because chaos is expensive. I am not talking about hiding assets or evading lawful taxes. I am talking about using plain legal architecture to separate family life from the default exposure that comes from leaving everything in your personal name with no planning around it. Trusts, LLCs for investment property where appropriate, clean estate planning documents, updated beneficiary designations, coordinated titling, and serious privacy thinking do not make you untaxable. They make you less sloppy. That distinction matters. Sloppiness is what invites avoidable damage. Most families wait until they are under pressure to fix these things. Pressure is the worst time to build structure. Structure should exist before you need it, the same way a seawall needs to be there before the storm. Then there is debt, the subject that confuses almost everyone because people insist on speaking about it morally instead of strategically. A house with no mortgage feels virtuous. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is simply naked equity sitting in the brightest possible spotlight. The right answer depends on age, cash flow, interest rate, risk tolerance, and the rest of your balance sheet. But I would urge any serious person to stop thinking of all debt as poison and start thinking of balance. Sheet design as a matter of optionality. A sensible line of credit, established before you need it, can preserve flexibility. A well-structured mortgage can keep liquidity in your hands while the asset does its work. A fully paid off-house can still be wonderful, but only if the rest of your financial system is strong enough that you are not house, rich option, poor, and politically overexposed. The point is not to extract equity recklessly. The point is to stop worshiping trapped equity as if trapped automatically means safe. Trapped equity is often just visible equity, and visible equity attracts policy attention. One of the cheapest and highest returning actions available to a homeowner is far less dramatic. Fight the number. By that I mean challenge bad assessments, understand local caps, maintain your homestead status where it truly applies, and do not treat the assessor's valuation as sacred truth just because it arrived in an official envelope. Bureaucratic numbers become expensive when nobody questions them. If the system overstates your property and you do nothing, then every future tax conversation begins from an inflated base. That is not just laziness. It is compounding laziness. I have watched investors spend hundreds of hours trying to pick the perfect stock and then spend 0 minutes checking whether the state is overvaluing the largest asset they own. That is irrational. The biggest leaks in a household are often hiding in the places that feel too mundane to inspect. You also need to separate a home from an investment in your own mind. If a property is purely personal, then you should evaluate it as shelter, lifestyle, geography, family utility, and emotional fit. If it is partly an investment, then it should be judged as an investment, tax burden, cash yield, maintenance, drag, exit flexibility, jurisdictional risk, leverage terms, and political visibility. Trouble begins when people insist a property is both sacred shelter and perfect investment while refusing to measure it honestly as either one. Now let us speak about the deeper issue. A great many people imagine the tax danger of the future as a dramatic raid on the rich. I think the larger danger is more ordinary than that. Once the state becomes intellectually comfortable with taxing wealth more directly, the line does not move from billionaires to nobody. It moves from billionaires to millionaires, from millionaires to luxury homeowners, from luxury homeowners to high-equity households. From there to whatever class of citizen can be isolated rhetorically and harvested practically. That is how almost every lasting revenue machine is built. It is introduced narrowly and justified morally. Then it expands administratively. That is why preparation matters more than outrage. Outrage is cheap. Structure is valuable. So if I were sitting at the kitchen table with a family that owned a home in a high-cost, high-tax, politically experimental state, I would tell them to do 6 things. First, know exactly how much of your net worth is tied to that one property and that one jurisdiction. Most people do not know. They guess. Guessing is not planning. Second, verify every ownership. Homestead, trust, and beneficiary document connected to the property. Not next year. This quarter. Third, review the assessed value and protest it. If the facts justify protest, governments have no incentive to lower numbers. Nobody challenges. Fourth, decide honestly whether your current state still deserves the privilege of being your legal home. Not emotionally. Financially and structurally. Fifth, stop treating all home equity as untouchable virtue. Design the balance sheet intentionally. Sixth, if you own investment property, study lawful conversion and exchange strategies before you need them, not after a rule changes and the window narrows. None of these moves requires panic. All of them require adulthood. The American homeowner still has more room to act than most people realize. But room to act is not the same as infinite time. Policy risk is one of those forces that seems theoretical until the paperwork becomes real. By then, the people who prepared look calm and the people who waited call it unfair. I have learned that unfairness is one of the least useful words in finance. Markets do not care about it. Tax codes do not care about it. Counties do not care about it. Legislatures certainly do not care about it. The useful words are exposure, structure, timing, optionality, and control. If you own a home, your job is not merely to admire the equity number on paper. Your job is to decide what that equity means in a world where governments are searching harder for durable tax bases, where public obligations keep rising, and where visible wealth is becoming easier to measure and harder to ignore. A home can still be a fortress, but only if you stop treating it like a trophy. The people who get hurt in the next cycle will not all be reckless speculators. Many of them will be disciplined, hardworking families who followed old rules inside a new system. They will discover too late that the game changed while they were still calling it by its old name. Do not be one of them. Do the boring work now while the issue still feels abstract. Abstract risk is the cheapest risk you will ever manage. Once it becomes concrete, everyone suddenly wants the same lawyer, the same CPA, the same planner, the same escape route, and the same protection that only seems obvious in hindsight. That is not when you want to start thinking. That is when you want to have already thought.